Hey everybody, it's Minus from PantheonPlus, and we are back to our Races of Terminus video, and this time we're going to jump on the Archai. Now, I like the Archai. I'm going to be honest with you. The thing that I like about Scar, which I ranked pretty high for an evil class, the Gnomes, and the Archai, is I consider these three races that VR has really created. I know Gnomes have been around before, but we all can agree that the Gnome take from Visionary Realms on Pantheon is pretty incredible. So if you haven't seen one of our videos before, we encourage you in the comments to go ahead and let us know what you think. These videos are always about community. Everything we try to do is about community. So I'm going to give you my answers to the questions, but what I'm most hopeful for is your answers. So first and foremost, thank you to everybody who's subscribed to our channel. If you haven't and you do enjoy watching our content, please consider giving us a subscribe. Click the button. And then on top of that, you can follow us on Twitter at PantheonPlus. And we did just recently open up our Discord, which you can access via www.pantheon.plus. There'll be a join Discord link right in the top. So what we're going to talk about is, first of all, we're going to introduce the race a little bit. We're going to talk about the Archai, kind of give you a little bit of a background so you can understand where they're coming from a little bit and where they may fit into the world. Number two, we're going to talk about the class selection. What classes can they be? And in that, what classes do we think that we'll see the most of, considering, their choices and their build, what they look like in their lore? The other thing we'll talk about is, do they remind you of anything, any other race in any other MMO you've played or any other game that you've played? What are the Archai to you? What do they remind you of? And then we're going to rank them 1 to 10. And that ranking is not some kind of scientific scale in any way, shape, or form. It's really just based on all the different things you feel are important, as will I, obviously, and I'll rank it out of 1 to 10. So let's jump into the lore of the Archai. The first thing I always tell everybody in these videos is, if you want the deep lore, the really good lore, the full storied lore of any of these races, please check out Chris Kane's video on the Archai. You'll see the link at the top here. And you can click that button after the video and go right to it and check it out. So I highly recommend watching it. It's a quick watch for the Archai. We don't know a lot about them, so it shouldn't take you long to be able to catch up on the lore. So let's jump right in. I'm going to give you the real abbreviated version of the lore. So essentially, Archai are a created being, which is kind of interesting. There was a being that was called, and I am going to butcher these, so please understand that, but there was a being that was called the Aeon, Oeyn. You pronounce that how you like. And these beings were pure magical energy. Okay. And what happened is that from the planet Aro, where they came from, the celestial lord basically went and took this race of pure energy and constructed followers. And those followers became the Archai. And the Archai are pretty interesting because they're beings of elements that are basically forging around this old ancient being of energy. And what's interesting is the type of energy is actually different in the Archai. They have a process called true birth, where they manifest with certain elements around them in the world, whether it's a liquid, fire, magic, whatever it is that they basically become born of is what they become. So it's a pretty interesting race. Now, here's the difference. This was a slave race. They created them to be slaves, and they uprise and they get away from their slavehood, so to speak. It's kind of interesting because we can tell a similar story about the Ixar in EverQuest, but it's very different. The Ixar's rise out of slavery and pure violence made them hated across the world, which is pretty interesting if you think about it. Whereas the Archai are actually seen as a very triumphant, respected race. They do love danger. They love the sport and thrill of violence, but in a way where it's very joyful, and they celebrate. They're as big as they are into being warriors, they are into celebrating their life and their existence. So it's a pretty interesting race that puts them as a neutral race in the way I see it anyway. But they're very, very, very interesting in that aspect of their being neutral, coming out from slavery, being respected from the way that they band together and fought back. So pretty interesting race. So when we look at their class selection, they're able to be a bard when it comes out, a druid, a monk, a shaman, a warrior, and a wizard. Okay. So when we look at that, it's an interesting set of classes. One of the interesting things about this race is because they're this foundation of elements around an energy, they are pretty large, but they make a point to say that the Archai are actually very nimble, even in their larger size. They're larger than humans, for example, and they're larger than elves, but they're still as nimble as those classes. So when you look and you see the fact that they can be a monk, right? That kind of ties into that. Yes, we're a bigger race, but we're still agile. We're still fast. We're still able to battle at a quick pace, even though we're a larger being. We're not as cumbersome as an ogre, so to speak. So it's pretty interesting. So looking across that, they have two healers they can be. They can be a shaman or a druid, and then they can be one tank, a warrior, and then they have DPS and wizard, DPS and monk, and support and bard. So this race has a full palette of options. Only one tank, but a full palette of options across them. And it's pretty interesting because if you look across their classes, they have the spiritual healing ability from a shaman and from a druid, but their only pure magic is from a wizard. So it's actually a pretty interesting take on the whole situation there. So I think that's pretty neat. The other thing is with that, let's see, looking down the classes, because it does surprise me they can't be Dire Lords. And I guess that's because they are seen as a joyful, pride-filled, triumphant race. So I guess I get that. Paladin, I understand. Paladin is very few. So, I mean, overall, cleric, same thing as Paladin, really. They're not really in the woods as rangers. They are able to be a druid, which still... It's really weird. I don't know. Is Pantheon trying to take a druid and ranger and really pull them apart more? Because we've seen that happening across the class selection. So, and then you throw a wizard in there, which makes sense, right? They don't have other classes like a summoner and such, even though they are manifested of energy, but they are a wizard. So it's an interesting dynamic. Now, here's where normally we say, oh, this is the class I think they're going to be. Well, if you go from a strict lore standpoint, I'm going to be pretty generic and say this seems to be a good warrior class because of their history, their rising of battle, they have their passion of battle, their rising up. The warrior seems to be a really good fit. But when I physically look at them and I see the energy, I really see the wizard. So there's kind of a clash in their appearance and their story, to me anyway. So it's very difficult for me to say which one I think they'll be. I'm going to say that you're probably going to see the appearance come through more than the lore. I think that people, obviously all are going to be very visual, whereas not everybody's going to get into the lore. So I think you may see a lot of wizard Archai, very similar to what I thought with Gnome, who's another energy infested being. So very, very interesting how the two of them are unique, but share kind of a common bond of the energy being within them. So I don't know, you make of that what you want. I think we'll probably see a lot of Archai wizards, personally. So do they remind you of any other race in MMO RPGs, and will their alignment matter? So I don't think their alignment's going to be a really big sticking point. If I'm going to be honest with you, they're going to be probably a pretty neutral race, if not a good race, so to speak. And then as far as other games, yes, the background story reminds me of an XR a little bit, but then they're this created being. So they're actually pretty unique. This is a pretty... for me, I can't really place another MMO that would be similar to this. So you guys tell me if something stands out, if there's something I'm forgetting about. And remember, it doesn't have to be an MMO. So is there another game where this type of being really stands out to you? When you think of elemental beings put together from energy and parts of the world, you think of really massive giant creatures, whereas this is, slightly larger than a human who's become an entire race, which is pretty interesting. So let's get into the final piece here. Then I'm going to hand it over to you. How would I rank them? It's very interesting. This is not something I pre-thought out. And as I'm talking about it, sometimes I throw the ranking out there. I don't know if I'd play an Archai. If I'm just going to be honest with you, I like that they're original. I like seeing them around. And the thing that really hurts this class is we have not seen a redesign. And I know that we haven't seen Scar either, but the Scar art is really cool in my opinion. But we've seen the Archai in some streams and they were really rough. And I can assume that we're going to see a pretty big rework of the Archai when we see the new models for them and the Scar and the others that we haven't seen recently. So that opinion could change on what I rank them. So what am I going to rank them? I don't think they're quite as cool as the Scar. I'm going to just give them a solid 5. I think they're unique. The size plus the speed is cool. They have the elemental being inside of them, which will give them some light effects, which is kind of nice. So, and again, it's unique. You have to apply to any unique race. So we'll give them a 5. We'll put them right in the middle. I think that their class selection is pretty good, and that'll kind of benefit into that too. So that's my opinion. I'm curious to see what everyone else thinks of the Archai. What do you think of their lore? Again, check out Chris. He's going to be much better than me. I gave you a very short, uneducated style of lore. So again, how would you rank them? What do you think of their class selection? What do you think the class we see the most will be? And like I said, finish that up. Where do you rank them? 1 to 10.